So, Courtney Hamilton.
Hey everybody, can you hear me okay? I have a really loud voice. This is also my very first time to speak, so take it easy on me. I don't even know how to work this. Let's see.
Well, don't do it yet.
Okay.
Is this it?
Yes. And as James said, I work privately with pediatric clients in clinic, in home, and in schools. I also see geriatric patients on the weekend at a local hospital. So I'm going to speak today. I'm going to give you some really basic foundational knowledge that I know a lot of parents I worked with in the past wish they had. Sitting in an IEP meeting, you hear a bunch of terminology, receptive skills, expressive skills, articulation, intelligibility, and I know that it's easy for that stuff to get jumbled. So I just want you to have some things to keep in your toolbox so that when you go in, you kind of know what they're talking about, and as teachers that you really have a grasp on what the difference is too. I work with BCBAs now, and when I first started, they're like, we need you to work with this guy's language. He has a really hard time with the S sound. So I'm going to kind of tell you the difference in what those look like. Oh, I got it. So language, this is just a basic definition. It's a dynamic and complex system of symbols with various modes. So that can be written language, it can be spoken, gestures, any kind of signs, pictures, any symbol that a person uses in order to communicate. So a language disorder, in turn, is impaired comprehension of the use of spoken language, the comprehension or use. So receptively, what people understand, and then the use, how they're able to communicate, whether verbally or with pictures or signs, as we said. So the disorder may involve any of the combination of the following. There are 3 things that make up language. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about those. So I said this is going to be a quick lesson from grad school, and I know there are a couple of SLPs in here, so I know you know this like the back of your hand. I just wanted to go a little bit more in depth. 3 parts of language. The first one is form, and that is kind of like the nuts and bolts, the grammar, that kind of stuff. Phonology. So the example I gave is the word pants and boys. They both end with an S. One of them is voiced, one of them is not. Pants and boys, it becomes a Z sound. That's phonology. Teachers know that. You work with it every day. Morphology is, it's like the rules and the constructions of words and how they can be different meanings. Adding the S to cups makes it totally different than if you're just talking about a cup. It makes it plural, one little letter. And then syntax is, in a nutshell, grammar itself, the composition of words, how they go together to convey meaning. If you say Dan bought a computer, that relays a message. Dan a computer bought, in our language, that is not correct syntax. The next part of language is content, so that's semantics. That is word meaning. It can be multiple meaning words like bat and bat. It can be idioms, metaphors, figurative language, word meaning. And then function, pragmatics. That's what we hear a lot about with social skills, social language. It's how conversational conventions work together. Greetings, taking turns, staying on topic. Those are all part of pragmatic language. So here we get into language versus speech, and we learned in grad school, you're not just a speech teacher. Not that that's a derogatory term, that's just what you get called a lot. Speech is an actual motor movement. It's something Ms. Kaspar talked a lot about. It's articulating, moving muscles, teeth, tongue, lips together to form spoken language. So it can be stuttering, that is a speech problem. It can be a voice problem. That all goes into speech. It's the motor movement, articulation, how sounds are made and how they sound. If a child has a lisp, if a child can't produce an R, all of those are part of speech. And then we have language, which can be broken down even further into receptive, that's comprehension, what the child's able to understand. Expressive language, that's verbal or nonverbal, how they communicate. Listening, talking, reading, and writing, all of those, that's what you do in school all day. You listen, you have to be able to read, write, understand. Language is at the basic foundation of all of those academic areas. Following directions, whether that's a teacher telling you what to do, whether it's your mom saying, go get the shoes, put them on, and then get in the car. And then being able to use words in the correct order to be able to express those things effectively and efficiently. So speech and language disorders can occur together or independently. I mean, as you know, you have kids in your class that just have issues producing words correctly, and you have some who have trouble answering or asking questions. And SLPs are trained to diagnose and treat both of these kinds of disorders among all populations and settings. So why are language skills so important? Like I mentioned before, language encompasses everything. If you're in math class and you have trouble with comprehending language, a word problem is going to be really difficult for you. It also, they've done several studies that show good communication skills actually help people to become more self-confident, have positive self-esteem. They have to have language to be able to learn to read, participate in decision-making, participate at school. It all goes hand in hand. So here are some signs that may show up in the classroom. And the main reason I wanted to list these is because if a child's struggling to tell time, are you going to think maybe they have a language disorder? I mean, I wouldn't have unless I knew. I would think, oh, they have issues with numbers or those kind of concepts, but it could truly be a deficit in language. All of these things can be traced to language deficits. So this is a really long paragraph, and you don't have to read it, but I just wanted to put it on here because it comes straight from the Alabama Administrative Code that states in order to qualify for speech or language impairment in our schools currently, a child has to score a 70 or below on a speech or language evaluation. Or on a language evaluation, I'm sorry. So I know there has to be a cutoff or everybody would be in special ed services. They have to do something. But what it's important to think about is, does that mean that if a child scores a 71, their language is normal? No. And does it mean that any score above 70 means that the child will have no trouble accessing their curriculum in the school? No, I mean, it doesn't. So look at this. This is kind of helpful to view it. I looked at the SELF, which is the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals, and the SELF P2, which is the preschool version. This is just a standardized assessment that's used in some school systems and clinics to look at language scale numbers and to be able to put a severity rating with it. So 115 and above, if a child scores a 115 or above, we can say their language skills are above average. 86 to 114, average. But then the two I circled, you have 78 to 85, that's a borderline at-risk score. 71 to 77, that's low, but they're not going to qualify for language intervention on that alone. Only way we can qualify them is with very low severe for SLI for language. So as a parent, if my child scored a 78, I'm still concerned about these language skills because they're going to impact them in the classroom and in life. So one research study I read called it an invisible disability because it's easy to look at numbers and say, okay, they qualify or they don't, but there's a meaning behind those numbers. So in classrooms, when teachers talk through material and they give directions and kids are reading and learning, our kids that have these deficits, they may fall in the mild to moderate range, they're still going to fall behind further and further and further, and that gap is going to widen. Typically, a child that has academic problems may have a deficit with language. They go together a lot. I read one study that said, on average, high school teachers have 2 to 3 students in every class that have some kind of deficit in language. So another thing I wanted to mention is that it doesn't have to be an SLP that targets these skills. SLPs in the schools have large caseloads, and they have, highly intense kids that they're working with. But this can be done with behavior specialists. It can be done with teachers, administrators, everybody, parents. We can all work together to help kind of narrow these gaps. Because if we don't, behavior becomes a concern, social issues, emotional issues, and then, of course, academics. So James mentioned related services. As I'm sure all of you know, speech and language can be a related service if the child qualifies under a different exceptionality. And our code states that they don't have to score 70 on a language evaluation in order to get that service. So as a parent, that's something you guys should know going into a meeting. If it's something that you're concerned about, you could at least ask for an evaluation to be completed. And in an evaluation for language, they don't just do a standardized assessment. They'll look at a full battery, an interview, a language sample, talk with the teacher, see how it's impacting in the classroom. Because some questions you have to ask is there a discrepancy between what the child can do with the language and what the child needs to do with language? And if so, that's when you need to start looking at research-based methods to employ with that child so that they can come up to grade level and make those gains that they need to. But I wanted to throw in here, too, that all of that needs to be a team-based decision. I've been in a school. I've sat in IEP meetings. It's not educators against parents. Everybody wants what's best for the kid. You all want your kids to do well. So just considering each child, their needs, and what would be best for them. Did I mess up? I'm stuck. And there's some formatting issues. But I read an article. Oh, go back.
Is that it?
I don't know. What was the one before that?
Hit the back button.
Okay, I'm going to do this one first. I read this article that was done at the University of, or a research study was done at South Alabama. And it was really interesting because it looked at adolescents, males and females. It looked at one group of adolescents that had been charged with criminal activity and had been like given a sentence by a judge, and then a group that had not. And what they looked at was language impairment in both of those groups, and they found that there was actually a higher incidence of language impairment in the group of kids who had been convicted, I guess, of a crime. They found no gender differences, so that was encouraging. It was across the board, but they saw that also they hadn't been previously diagnosed. So 21% of the males in this study, it turns out that they actually struggled with language and they had never received any kind of intervention for it. So these authors advocate that anytime a special ed evaluation is completed, that a language test needs to be done just to rule it out if it's not an issue. I know that there's a lot of technical stuff that goes into it and time and all of that, but if you have a concern about language skills, just do the assessment and then you know. So also, a lot of kids in schools struggle with behavior problems. A lot of times, undiagnosed language delays can manifest as behavior issues. Think if you can't tell somebody what you want effectively or efficiently, it's frustrating. So let's see. I kind of said earlier that language plays a strong role in their emotional behavior functioning. Oh, and so it's really great to collaborate with behavior therapists. I work really closely with behavior therapists, as I said, and I think that team approach is very beneficial. So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of students that I've seen in the past. This one is a little 8-year-old girl. She's in 2nd grade. She's a social butterfly, chit-chats all the time. Talking to her on the surface, you would never have any indication that something was going on. But a closer look shows that she's having trouble with like complex sentences, embedded clauses, things like that. She has trouble with math word problems, adding INGs, a lot of things I'm sure they spoke about with reading, but literacy, she's having trouble with comprehension, struggling with verb tenses, and then phonetically she would spell the word kicked with a T because that's what it sounds like without understanding that past tense ED is pronounced with the T but spelled with ED. So she got some intervention. It was speech language language intervention along with some literacy intervention. She was below grade level. She didn't even understand spacing between words, which is actually tied back to language as well. And actually, ASHA, the governing body that she mentioned earlier, has included literacy in the scope of practice for speech language pathologists. So we're now qualified to work on literacy as well. But let's see, she didn't understand. Okay, so one of the videos we watched earlier showed a little boy reading and he noticed that it didn't sound right and was able to go back and self-correct. A child that can't do that doesn't have enough of a foundation of language to be able to realize that they made a mistake. They're just working so hard to get through it. She has phonological difficulties which showed up on this standardized test. Instead of Thanksgiving, she would spell it Thanksgiving. That's how she says it. That's how it sounds to her. This little girl's been in therapy for a little over a year and is almost at grade level. And then this next one, this is a little boy. He was a good student when he was younger, but he just continued to get worse and worse and worse, and he struggled. His teachers said that he was lazy or unmotivated, but really he struggled to read. He didn't understand routines, and it started to affect him emotionally. And this could be a child with an underlying language disorder that wouldn't be obvious at first glance, looking at him, that was the problem. And then the last student, I actually just had this little boy's IEP meeting this week. He was referred for special ed services. He was not making good grades. He wasn't paying attention. He was disorganized. He didn't want to come to school. And then they tested him and said, well, he got an 87 on his IQ test and an 83 on the self, so he's fine. He doesn't need it. Well, he also has a diagnosis of ADHD. So with further look, you can say, well, an 83 is not average. It's not horrible, but it's not average. He could benefit from these things. So he actually did end up qualifying for services, and he's going to get language as a related service, actually inclusive services in the classroom in his general setting to help those skills generalize. So I know that in Alabama right now we're struggling with finances. I don't want to throw at you something that's like super expensive and time consuming to do. We just need some quick, easy things that can be beneficial and that everybody can do. So I just wanted to give you some little simple, helpful things you can do in the classroom or at home, depending on your child's level. They can be done by really anybody, and a lot of them are probably things you're already doing. I wanted to reference that ASHA website. She referenced it earlier. They have a lot of peer-reviewed, like really technical research-based studies, but they also just have like simple, everyday language, written articles, blogs, links that'll be really helpful for you. And then at the very end, I have some grade-specific checklist type skills that as a teacher you could go through and think of each student like, oh, maybe I need to dig a little bit deeper into this. So for comprehension, my number one thing is books. You can never read too many. You can never, kids never get too old for that. I don't want you to focus on reading every single word on the page exactly as it's written. Make it more of a conversation, interactive, ask questions, anticipate endings. What do you think is going to be next? What do you see? What happened after? Talk about story grammar elements. Who were the characters? Where were they? What did they do? If you start that at a young age, kids typically end up loving books and loving to read. Some other ideas, doing crafts. You can answer questions, ask questions, solve problems, give a kid a piece of paper but not a pencil or any scissors and tell him to draw a picture and cut it out. Well, he's forced to be like, I need some scissors, I need a paper. Simon Says is good for listening, following directions. You can make it harder, adding conditional directions. Before you touch your toes, touch your nose. And then Guess Who is a really great game for some older kids. They have to make inferences and ask questions that lead to the answer. So for expression, I said just incorporate this into daily activities. Have them make the grocery list. You talk through it, go through together. Have them describe the foods that you're buying. Have a little tea party, and, well, that's the next one, but you can do a tea party for expression too. Have your kid build something with Legos or blocks and then explain to you how they did it. If they don't know and they're having trouble with this, you can scaffold it and give a model. Oh, you did this, 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 and then they can kind of like learn from that and be able to do it the next time. I Spy, that's using a carrier phrase, and that way they can kind of plug in their language and it'll grow that way. And then for pragmatics, that social language, something for like middle school, high school kids that I've been seeing a lot is using like that bit strips. Have y'all seen that, where you make like a picture of yourself and it's doing something, you put a little comment? A lot of them think that's really cool. It can help with perspective taking, inferencing, things like that. Younger kids, play with dolls, have a tea party, talk about what this person would think if you said this, that kind of stuff. Visual cues are great in the school. They can just be on a kid's desk for reminders. I added video modeling. It's highly research-based, as you know. A social skills group can meet at school, and I added a lunch bunch. That's something that's cheap. You're already at school. You can have a group of kids. Do it at lunch once a week. You're seeing a lot of kids at once. You can work on a lot of different things, and it's in their natural environment using skills that they need to be able to do. And they don't have to miss instruction. You don't have to pull them out of math class to work on social skills. You can do it during lunch. Okay, and then these are these handouts that I thought might be helpful depending on your grade level. It just gives kind of like some benchmarks they should have in terms of like speech. These are the sounds they should have. Writing, reading, speaking, and listening. Just some simple things. Here's first grade. Phonemes are just speech sounds, so they should be able to make all sounds except R, S, Z, V, T, H, and I think that's ja, as in like measure. And then I have second grade. By second grade, they should be able to produce all sounds. And then third. But I can email this to you guys if you want each grade level. And then here are some tips for parents at the end, and this is what we talked about, talking, reading, things like that, depending on your kid's age. And as a speech pathologist that's worked in a school and out of a school, all the speech pathologists I know in schools are excellent. They love their kids. They want them to do well. They're overworked and kind of stretched thin, but they're willing to talk to you. They're willing to listen to what you have to say. Just give them a call. And there are some references if you're interested. All right, that's all.